This is the Engines of Our Ingenuity, made possible by the friends of KUHF Houston.
Today we ask, who should own a patent? The University of Houston's College of Engineering presents this series about the machines that make our civilization run and the people whose ingenuity created them. I am troubled by the patent and copyright system. It lets one person invent something and another one own the patent. Inventors can sell patents. Survivors can inherit them. Employers can own their employees' inventions. Then, too, one person often files a patent when others have provided key ideas. An event from 1857 puts all that in a particularly ugly perspective. That year, a plantation owner named Oscar Stewart wrote to the Secretary of the Interior. His slave, Ned, had invented a new and very effective cotton scraper. Stewart wanted to patent it. Historian Portia Jones explains that Stewart walked around the patent office because he knew the Commissioner of Patents was a Northerner. He might not understand about masters and slaves. But the Secretary of the Interior went straight to the patent office anyway, and they wrote back saying Ned would have to swear an oath that he was a citizen before they'd give him a patent. Of course, as a slave, he was not a citizen. Stewart blew up when he read that. He was certainly not so foolish as to think Ned could hold a patent. After all, Ned was just property. Stewart obviously meant the patent for himself. A nasty North-South issue had landed in the Attorney General's lap, so he made a draconian ruling. Henceforth, patents would not be given for slave inventions, neither to master nor to slave. So Stewart went into business making Ned's cotton scraper without the luxury of patent protection. No matter, he made a pile of money anyway. And his advertising said openly, the scraper was the invention of a Negro slave, thus giving the lie to the abolition cry that slavery dwarfs the mind of the Negro. Jefferson Davis, soon to be president of the Confederacy, ran afoul of that ruling a year or so later. His brother had a slave named Benjamin Montgomery. Montgomery was a smart mechanic who'd invented a propeller to replace steamboat paddle wheels. Now it couldn't be patented. When the South broke away from the Union, Davis saw to it that Confederate patent law clearly made slave inventions into the property of their masters. The Civil War ended that, but the larger matter of one person owning another's creative output remained. We can hardly argue against rewarding invention, but how far from the inventor those rewards often land. A friend, an English teacher giving a TV course, recently had to pay a book company to let him quote from its edition of John Donne's poetry, and Donne has been dead since 1631. I'm troubled by the words intellectual property, for invention has no material being. When we try to treat it like material property, we create contradictions. In the end, we can no more own ideas than Stewart or Davis could own the people who created them. Today, the inventor of an engine lubricator changes the English language. The University of Houston's College of Engineering presents this series about the machines that make our civilization run and the people whose ingenuity created them. Elijah McCoy's parents were slaves who used the Underground Railway to escape from Kentucky into Canada. Elijah was born there in 1843. His father did well in Canada, and he was able to send Elijah off to college in Scotland. 5 years later, Elijah McCoy returned as a trained engineer. But prospects weren't good for black engineers in Canada then, during the Civil War. The best job he could get was work as a railroad engine fireman in Michigan. But he was made of the stuff that could turn that kind of adversity into profit. In the mid-19th century, railroad men had to constantly oil their steam engines. That meant repeated stopping and starting. It was a nuisance job. It ate up a lot of time, and the engine was in danger any time oiling was overlooked or delayed. McCoy began experimenting with lubricators. The trick was to create a mechanism with a large reservoir that fed oil into the engine one drip at a time. He patented his first lubricator in 1872 and quickly followed it with 5 more improvements. McCoy's lubricators were successful precisely because he understood the problem from both sides. He was a trained engineer, and he'd worked for years in direct contact with machinery. Today, lubricators are commonplace items. You'll find them in any engine. They're one of the invisible necessities that make the engines of our ingenuity run. At first, white railway engineers called McCoy's new lubricator nigger oil cups, but not for long. These new oiling devices were too effective. They made life so much simpler. Pretty soon, McCoy's competitors were copying his design. Pretty soon, those same people began asking if a given lubricator was a copy or if it was the real McCoy. Pretty soon, appreciation triumphed over racism, and the expression real McCoy was added to the English language. Elijah McCoy filed his 45th patent in 1915 when he was 72. By then, engines were running at much higher temperatures, and lubrication had become increasingly difficult. He invented a graphite oil lubricator, and then formed a company to produce it. McCoy went into old age proud, active, and alert. He lived to the age of 86. Few of us remember this fine engineer and inventor today, but he permanently changed America in two ways. He left steam engine technology much better than he found it, and he was the real McCoy, who wrote his name where none of us will ever forget it. Today, a fable of death by racial superiority. The University of Houston's College of Engineering presents this series about the machines that make our civilization run and the people whose ingenuity created them. Black Americans are horribly at risk of hypertension. Half of black American males are hypertensive when they reach 50. 10 times as many die of hypertension as do whites. Kidney disease is 18 times as common among blacks as it is among whites. Diabetes also hits blacks much harder. Dr. Jared Diamond suggests a startling reason for this imbalance. He invites us into the West African bush in, say, 1800. Slavers capture 100 Africans. They put them in chains and march them 800 miles to a coastal port. They load them down with their supplies. They give them little water or food. 25 die of exhaustion in the month-long trip. 9 more die of heat and dehydration in a coastal holding cage. Only 66 live to cross the ocean, chained in their own filth in the hold. 7 more die of diarrhea, heat, and scurvy on the way. 3 die waiting to be sold. Then another 16 die of heat exhaustion and bad diet during the first 3 years on the plantation. By now 40, maybe fewer, have survived. They've made it because they could adapt to a diet with hardly any salt. The Darwinian selection process has created a race of super body salt savers. The survivors also have remarkable sugar metabolism to sustain them through starvation. The survivors of slavery have other natural advantages. One dramatizes our point today. It's a resistance to malaria. Sickle cell hemoglobin gives that resistance. But when people protected by the sickle cell trait marry, 1 in every 4 of their children suffer sickle cell anemia. So the blessing becomes a curse. Black Americans emerge with a huge Darwinian advantage, but the advantage turns to a death sentence now that we load our diets with salt and sugar. All this creates a hard moral fable in a world that loves specialization. The best survivors are not specialized. They're people who can adapt to varying conditions. Sooner or later it works against us to become a specialized Superman. Today, black Americans come into their own in a land that has not treated them well. As they do, it is an eerie fact that the hard-bought ability to live on a low-salt, low-sugar diet turns to disadvantage. I ask anyone who believes in racial superiority to look at the damage this black superiority has done. In the end, the only real edge is adaptability, and that's a human trait. It is not a racial one. I'm John Lienhardt at the University of Houston, where we're interested in the way inventive minds work.